Barbara is co-director of the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion, and she has with her Randall, who's Senior Executive Consultant and Executive Coach Inclusion Inc. And they're going to give us an overview of the GDIB. So please, a warm round of applause for Barbara Deane.
And we're two of the expert panelists from around the world who work to bring the GDIB to life. It's really interesting that we had this opportunity in Seattle, and I'm really happy that we were able to do that. Now, tonight we're going to give you an overview and encourage you to use the GDIB.
Events like this are being conducted all over the world. You can go on the website for the GDIB and you can find events in Sao Paulo, in Singapore, and there was a big one in San Francisco with LinkedIn. So there's been a lot of launch events around the world. And as Julie said, this is a free resource. There's a commitment by the authors and the expert panelists to keep it free. And it's easily accessed online, and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. I love this quote.
I guess I have to do this.
Yes, there you go. Nope. There we go. Organizations have to have inclusion to be successful today. And I think that's just a great quote from a business professor. And I put it out there every chance I get. He said this to me in an interview, and I just thought it was great. So I have some questions for you. So by a raise of hands, how many of you think you know what diversity is?
Higher.
Higher, there you go. Way, there you go. All right. How many of you think you know what inclusion is?
Wow.
All right. How many of you believe diversity and inclusion add value to your organization? Good show. Different question. How many of you feel included in your organization? Raise your hands. Not as many. Another question. How many of you would say everyone in your organization feels included? Oh my goodness, Randall.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why we're here. Now, that phrase on this slide is important because that was the headline of the press release for the 2016 edition of the GDIB. It basically tells you what the GDIB group feels they've accomplished. And when you think about that, let's move forward. The GDIB is an important document because, people ask, why was it created? Why were so many people involved? We all know that diversity and inclusion has become as a worldwide practice that is critical as an organization's success. As with other disciplines like quality and safety, there have to be standards that help you measure your progress. So we figured that if we do that for other disciplines, why not do it for D&I? Now, the question, again, I will pose is, why was the guide created? Well, the bottom line is that we thought that there needed to be a way for the work that we do to be looked at from the highest quality level possible. And with regard to the number of people that were involved, we wanted to make the GDIB truly global. So we brought together a group of experts and expertise and perspectives from around the world that included people from every country you can imagine to bring their expertise and their thoughts together. Now we know that many organizations concentrated on D&I at one time or other. And often they only pick one thing to work on. It could be recruitment, it could be supplier diversity, it could be training. And what we've learned is that if you pick one thing, you're generally going to fail. You're going to fail because this should be systemic. you should be working on more than one effort at a time. What about training, Barbara? What do you think about training?
Well, having been in this field for a long time, I've watched organizations do diversity training as their initiative over and over and over again. In the late 1980s and the 1990s, that's what organizations did. They trained people. And then they were unhappy because the organization didn't change. Well, you don't change an organization by training people. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So training is one of the benchmarks. Training is one of the efforts that you have to do. And you have to have a more systemic approach. So training's important, but it's not all there is to do.
That's true. Now, essentially, the GDIB helps us do 4 things. Recognize that D&I is complex. Okay, it's not an easy thing to fix. Figure out where we are. We need a baseline. Determine our strategy. We need to figure out what we want to do. And then finally, measure our progress. Because we want to really measure the progress and monitor the progress in our efforts.
Okay. You have my phone. Go ahead. I'll text you.
Now what this is what you see on the screen. Whoops. Yeah, there we go. What you see on the screen here is an arc of our history. This effort actually started out in the Tennessee Valley Authority, which some of you may be familiar with, back in the 90s. And it became global in 2006. That's when they started bringing experts together to try to get a global fix on D&I. As of 2016, we published our 10th anniversary edition. And we expect these to continue because, as Barbara said, and as Julie said, diversity and inclusion will continue to grow and change. Barbara?
Okay. Give me my slide.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, this infographic shows all the key elements contained in the 80-page booklet. Yes, the GDIB is complex. There's no doubt about it. But we're going to try and make it simple tonight and just touch on the high points. So first of all, as you've heard now at least 3 times, the GDIB represents a consensus of 95 expert panelists. I know I spent about 10 to 12 hours per round, and there's 3 rounds of review and research on the GDIB. So it's quite an investment of time on the part of the expert panelists. Secondly, it's applicable to all sectors, all types, all sizes of organizations around the world. Current GDIB users spread out across 11 sectors. So it's not just large corporations, it's education, it's government, it's military, it's nonprofit. It's a very nice array of organizations. Thirdly, it's designed to be flexible. You can shift it to respond to where you are in the world. You can shift it to respond to your status as a company, your size, and some of the things you're dealing with. So at a glance, here's what it contains. So it has 3 key definitions: diversity, inclusion, and global. It has 2 ultimate goals, and I'll come back to those in a minute. There are 5 approaches to diversity and inclusion. There are 4 groups of benchmarks. So you have the foundation group, the green one. This is where you drive the strategy. You have the internal group. This is where you attract and retain people. These are the internal things you do. Then you have the bridging group. The bridging group helps align everything else in the model. And then you have the external group where you're thinking about suppliers and customers. And then you have 14 categories of benchmarks and 14 actions. Now, we're not going to go through this in this presentation, but you're going to be introduced to some of these in your breakout sessions. All of the breakout captains have worked really hard. Who's calling me? None other than my daughter. So you're going to learn more about the benchmarks in your breakout sessions. And there are 266 benchmarks overall, and they are at 5 levels, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. So why is it important to work on D&I? Number 1, because we think it will improve organizational performance. And second of all, we think it will create a better world, one that's fair and just and respectable of individuals and their differences. And I want you to know that those goals were not in there in 2011. So those goals kind of came to the top as the expert panelists worked in the 2016 version. So I was really proud when we were able to really say, why are we doing this? And so it got to be really explicit. Okay. So there are 5 approaches to D&I, and what the authors tried to do was represent the different ways that people do this work and the different approaches that organization uses. So compliance is necessary. You know, we have to follow the law, but it's not sufficient. And competence is necessary to execute a really solid diversity initiative, but it's not enough. So you have to dig into the systems and processes to change an organization, and that's what the GDIB does. You have to do different things. I swear. I'll handle that in a minute. So you have to use different approaches to get different results. Now, what's the GDIB based on? Well, as we said, there's research, so it's long-term, it's ongoing, it's in-depth, qualitative work by both practitioners and scholars. And you've got the experience of 95 people working in all different approaches. You know, people in social justice, people in corporations, people in nonprofits, people in education. They're all bringing their view, their vantage point together to put this together. So there's been a great deal of contribution and reviewing that has gone on. And it doesn't mean that they all agree. Consensus means that we agree that this is the best we can do. But it doesn't mean that they agree on every single thing. And so in the 2016 version, Julian Allen put a page in that says, you know, some of the differences of opinion about some of the expert panelists. And that's new. We didn't do that in 2011. And then finally, there are clear guidelines for using the GDIB, and it is globally accepted terminology.
Now, let's touch upon benchmarks. Benchmarks are standards, milestones, criteria for success, etc. And, you know, what I want to point out is that they let you gauge where you are. You can figure out where you want to go, i.e. towards the best practices, and indicate what you've got to do to get there. So in other words, basically, benchmarks help you kind of chart your way through this morass of D&I. In terms of the definitions, there are 3 definitions that we used in the GDIB. One was diversity, the second was inclusion, and the third is global. And we came to consensus on the definitions. Now, when you look at the definition of diversity, it's pretty comprehensive. But what I want you to think about is this. Think about diversity as a mix. Age, race, ethnicity, etc. It's really all a mix. When we think about inclusion, again, we all came to consensus on this definition. Think about inclusion this way. Inclusion is how you get the mix to work well together to become productive. So we've simplified that for most people's understanding. And then finally, we talk about global. Now, when you talk about global, everybody says, well, I'm not a global organization. Well, guess what? The way this was written is such that it applies to you whether you're global or not. Whether you're a local organization or global organization, the benchmarks will apply to you. Barbara?
We think it's important to call out the 5 levels of measurement. So every category, the 14 categories, all the benchmarks in the category are organized according to these 5 levels. So they're designed for an organization to assess its current state on each of the benchmarks. And they enable you to gauge where you are, how you're doing, and understand what the desired or ideal state is. Now, at the inactive level, face it, you're not doing very much.
Nothing.
The reactive level, you know, you're basically working with a compliance mindset. So you're not really trying to change the organization. So at the proactive level, this is when you start to do substantive diversity work. And it just gets more and more and more. So you just, as you begin to work at the 3rd level, You realize looking at the fourth level, the fifth level, that's where you're trying to reach. You're trying to reach best practices. The authors and the expert panelists have been striving to make the GDIB user tools accessible for persons with disabilities. And this is a critical D&I goal. And we're using the World Wide Web Consortium, an international community that develops the web standards. This is the model. You have a copy of the model in the handout that was left on your seat. Reminding you, the model shows the 4 groups. The foundation group, you can't get very far if you don't put your foundation in place. And this is vision, leadership, and structure. And then you have along the left side of the triangle, you have the internal benchmarks. These are where you're trying to attract and retain people. So here's where you find recruitment, retention, development, and here's where you find learning and education. On the right-hand side are the external benchmarks, and here's where you're trying to reach out, listen, and to serve society. So here's where your supplier diversity is, here's where social responsibility is, marketing, multicultural marketing, and then in the middle are the bridging group. And these are the things that you have to have to tie everything together. This is where you have your communications plan. So the whole benchmark on just how to craft your communications. And this is one, in the early years, people absolutely forgot this. I published 1 article on this topic in 12 years. So people just absolutely forgot how important the communication piece was. And then the assessment, how are you going to measure? Well, you're going to measure all throughout, all the benchmarks, right? So you've got one category that really focuses on that. And then the newest category in the mix is sustainability. And this is new to the 2016, and organizations around the world are beginning to connect D&I to sustainability. So the model symbolizes a systemic approach.
Now, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is this. A lot of people complain about the fact that the document's too long. Some complain about the fact that, there are too many benchmarks. That we should really only pick one initiative and go after that. Do it to death. Well, we disagree. The panel says that this is really a systemic approach. So if you want diversity light, this is not it for you. What I wanted to do is find somebody in the audience who has a copy of the book. They hold it up.
There it is.
There it is, back there.
There it is.
80
There it
pages. 80 pages. Okay?
There it is.
But it's approachable. That's the most important thing.
Okay, so the GDIB, the GDIB is now in a new home, and that new home is the Center for Global Inclusion. This is a nonprofit organization that was just formed in the process of our organizing this event. So the authors felt that the whole effort is just moving so fast and growing so much that they really needed an organization to manage it. And so this organization has been put together, and I want to remind you that the GDIB is free. However, if you want to use it in your organization, we ask that you fill out a permission form, and permission will be freely given. The only reason we do that is to find out who's using it. And I can tell you there are people who use it who never fill out a permission form, right? But I can't tell you how many sectors there are if people don't fill out the permission form. And also, it allows you, it gets you on the GDIB newsletter list. And Julie and Alan and that crew are just incredibly putting together new information, new user tools, new connections, and helping to spread the word. So it's really important to fill out the permission form and then get on the list and start to be a GDIB user. There's the slides that we're using are the free slides. They're in the user tools, so we took them and we manipulated them a little bit for our purposes, but many of them are there. The handout that you have, that one-page handout, both of those tools are in there, so you can print those off. Everything's a PDF, you're ready to print it off, although the slides are PowerPoint files, so you can actually use that. So there are handouts, there's the infographic, there's the model, and there's testimonials. So there's a lot of information on this new center website. So the Center for Global Inclusion.org, that's the new website for the GDIB.
Oh, it did work.
Oh, we don't want that one yet.
Okay.
That's coming.
All right, so we'll go back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure working with you.
Same here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
How are we doing so far? There we go. You guys figured it out. How are we doing so far?